The Man Who Saw America Before It Knew Itself. It was a chilly fall morning of 1789 when churches' bells were ringing through the narrow streets of Philadelphia. Nevertheless, a letter was lying unnoticed on a wooden desk in a quiet government office. The ink was still wet. The seal was intact. And yet, if somebody had come across this letter that day, the future of the United States might have been changed altogether. The letter did not warn of the enemy invasion. It did not talk of uprising. It foretold everything. The story begins. Long time before the U.S. decided to see itself as a world power, later on when skyscrapers will be built and the dollar will rule the world, there were men who saw this very clearly, that freedom by itself will not be enough to rescue the new nation. During the last decades of the 18th century, the U.S. were an unstable, experimental, and highly divided nation. The 13 former British colonies which were united through victory were now at odds with each other owing to the rights and freedoms they had fought for. There was no assurance that the Republic would make it. History tells that the Founding Fathers were the brave and confident creators of the democratic system. The reality was far more doubtful. Actually, they thought the American trial might fail when they were talking in secrecy, among them quite a few. One of them was a person whose name is hardly ever mentioned today. Therefore, what he foresaw was too inconvenient to be recalled. His biography doesn't start in the U.S., but in a small, obscure part of Europe. A child of empires. Or rather, in a place where the world was still run by monarchs and the military, he came to the world in 1730, in a time when kings made up truth and the armies implemented it. His youth years were surrounded by the intrigues of politics, the fights between religions, and the falling of the empires. He saw the cycles of old and new governments, not in decades, but in months. What he learned as a boy shocked him when he became an adult. Ruling empires don't die with loud crashes. They die quietly, through their pride, their debt, and their refusal to accept the truth. By the time he was 30, he had been to England, France, and the German principalities. He was fluent in several languages. He studied economic theory, military strategy, and political philosophy practically every day. But unlike the majority of contemporary intellectuals, he wasn't drawn to ideals. He was drawn to patterns. And every single pattern led to one final point. Democracies are theoretically fragile, and the U.S. was no different. Come to the U.S. When the war was still in the recent past and the wounds could still be seen in the charred towns as well as in the broken families, the people were happy to be free, but the government was in a bad shape. The Articles of Confederation were coming to an end. The states acted like separate countries. What really stunned him the most was not the disunity. It was the arrogance. Americans were sure that evil will never come back. History knew better. He visited the cities of Boston, New York, and Philadelphia, and he was mostly listening rather than talking. Merchants were complaining about the lack of stability. Veterans were asking for their unpaid wages. Farmers were scared of losing their land. Politicians were always fighting. The country was free, but it was not safe. And freedom without organization, in his opinion, was just a countdown. The secret meetings. In places where the light was coming from candles and guards were at the doors, he started seeing together influential people, lawmakers, military officers, and thinkers. Some would later become famous, while others would only be mentioned in footnotes. He was quiet but persuasive. Order-wise, one by one, he was presenting to them the examples of Rome, Dutch Republic, and England, telling how each of them had fallen down after their civil wars. Afterward, he did a comparison between the United States and all of them, which no one anticipated. The reaction was instant, very negative and angry. They argued that America was not like the other countries. They also added that America was chosen one, exceptional, and it could not be affected like others. He didn't argue. He presented to them the figures: debt, political polarization, foreign influence, civil unrest. Every single one of these signs pointed to the very beginning of the downfall stages which he had seen before. The people in the room became quiet. The letter they ignored. When he was not able to convince them completely, he decided to draft his warning in an essay, a carefully detailed investigation, which he sent to numerous government offices in 1789. That letter was lying unacknowledged while time was moving. Only a few years later, the events would be starting unfolding in the exact order as he had anticipated. Economic panic, internal rebellion, foreign manipulation, they were all considered as temporary ones. However, none of them were. A nation tested. With time passing by, the United States were spreading their influence to the West. They were getting bigger in land, but not in unity. The institution of slavery was polluting the base. The political parties turned into fierce adversaries. Money was getting concentrated. Power was changing hands quietly. He could only look on, getting older and more lonely with each passing day, as the nation disobeyed every historic lesson it once feared. At the time when the dispute finally turned into the Civil War, his warnings no longer had the effect of being surprising. They were clear. However, by that time, it was too late to stop the chain of events. Deliberately forgotten. After he had died, his works were put in the archives, not often referenced, and gradually removed from the public talks, not because they were incorrect, but because they were uncomfortable. He foresaw not only fights, but cycles. He foresaw not only collapses, but repetitions. And what was most unsettling of all, he warned that America would have to go through the same test again someday when people would be too confident to see reason, and history would be ignored as usual. Why his story is important. Currently, his name is After his demise, his ideas gradually got buried, first in the systems, then in the crises, and finally in the debates that make up the nation. And they're still alive, very much alive. It was not by mistake that history forgot him. It was its deliberate choice, because to remember him would be to admit a very terrible truth. The biggest threat to America has never been invasions. It has always been the United States itself.